Michael Jackson was still young enough to be underestimated when a powerful producer decided his family name was a problem that needed to be fixed. What should have been a breakthrough meeting turned into something colder, something humiliating, when the man behind the desk suggested the Jacksons would be easier to sell if they sounded less black. He wasn't just talking about branding, he was talking about erasing where Michael came from. A producer was racist toward Michael Jackson's family, and Michael Jackson answered with 5 words that ended the man's career. It was the late 1970s in Los Angeles, inside a sleek record company office that smelled like polished wood, stale coffee, and expensive decisions. The building was one of those places where every wall seemed designed to make people feel smaller the moment they walked in. Gold records lined the hallway. Framed magazine covers hung near the elevators. Assistants moved fast and spoke softly, as if even their footsteps belonged to the people upstairs. For the Jackson family, this meeting mattered, not because they were desperate, not because they were unknown, but because every major move in music still seemed to run through rooms like this, rooms full of men who thought they knew what the public wanted before the public even heard the song. Michael had come with his mother, Catherine, and one of his brothers. He was already carrying the strange double weight of being both young and world-famous, admired by millions, but still spoken over in private rooms by older men with contracts in their drawers. The producer's name was Richard Harlan. He was known for turning artists into packages. That was the word people used around him, not performers, not musicians, packages. He liked polished images, market-tested language, and anything that could be made safe for the widest audience possible. In other words, he liked control. When the Jacksons were shown into his office, Harlan didn't stand to greet Catherine. He shook Michael's hand. He nodded at Michael's brother. Then he sat back down and let his eyes rest on Catherine for half a second too long, just long enough to make it clear he didn't think she belonged in the conversation. "Mrs. Jackson," he said eventually, in the kind of voice that sounded polite until you listened closely enough to hear the dismissal in it. Catherine smiled anyway. She had spent her life walking into rooms where men thought softness meant weakness. She knew better. Michael noticed the slight, even if no one else reacted. At first, the meeting sounded normal. Harlan talked about future records, image positioning, international appeal, crossover markets. He used phrases like next phase and long-term value. He praised Michael's instincts, his look, his voice, his pull. He spoke the language of opportunity so fluently that for the first 10 minutes, it almost covered the uglier thing underneath. Almost. Then Harlan opened a folder, took out a mock publicity sheet, and slid it across the desk. At the top, in bold print, was a name. Not Michael Jackson, something else, something cleaner, shorter, sterile, a stage name built to sound neutral. Michael stared at it for a second, not fully understanding. His brother saw it first. "What is that?" he asked. Harlan folded his hands and answered as if he were explaining something obvious to children. "A strategy," he said. "The talent is there. The audience is there. But if we're talking about true mass appeal, there are certain things that need to be adjusted." Michael looked up. "Adjusted?" Harlan nodded. "The name, for one. Jackson carries too much baggage in certain markets." The room changed. No one moved, but the air changed. Catherine's face stayed calm, though something in her eyes hardened. Michael's brother leaned forward. "What baggage?" Harlan gave a small shrug, like he hated being forced to say things plainly. "Let's not be naive," he said. "There are parts of the country, parts of the industry, advertisers, television people. Certain audiences respond better when a name feels more universal." He paused, then made it worse. "Less ethnic," he said, "less obviously black." The words landed like broken glass. Michael went completely still. Not because he was shocked by racism itself, he had seen enough of the world already to know what it looked like. But hearing a man in an expensive office suggest that his own family name needed to be sanded down, cleaned up, stripped of its history so white audiences would feel more comfortable. That was different. That was someone trying to sell him a future by asking him to bury his bloodline first. Catherine was the first to speak. "No," she said. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. She just said it with a quiet certainty that made the word feel heavier than shouting ever could. Harlan smiled the way men like him smile when they think resistance is emotional and therefore temporary. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, "I understand the attachment, I do. But I'm not talking about family sentiment. I'm talking about business." Michael looked at his mother. Catherine sat straighter in her chair. "And I'm talking about my family," she said. Harlan exhaled and tapped the paper once with his finger. "With respect," he said, "your son can become bigger than the name he was born with." Michael's eyes dropped to the sheet again. For a moment, no one spoke. And that silence mattered, because in it, Michael was not deciding about marketing. He was deciding what kind of man he would become when someone offered him success in exchange for self-erasure. Harlan, misreading the silence as hesitation, leaned back in his chair and pushed further. "This is how the business works," he said. "People don't buy discomfort. They buy what feels easy, familiar. You want him in every home in America? Don't make America work too hard." Michael's brother muttered something under his breath, angry and immediate. But Michael still said nothing. That made Harlan bolder. "You've already beaten the odds," he said. "Now it's about refinement, positioning. If you want him to last, the image has to be shaped properly, the name too." Then he said the sentence that none of them would forget. "A black family name is a ceiling," he said. "I'm offering him a ladder." Catherine stood up. Not dramatically, not with fury, just with the controlled dignity of someone who had heard enough. "My son is not ashamed of his name," she said, "and neither am I." Harlan barely reacted. "You're making this emotional." Michael stood too, slowly, and when he did, the room changed again, because now the producer was no longer speaking over a mother. He was staring at the artist himself. Michael picked up the paper with the fake name printed across the top. He looked at it for a second, then folded it neatly once down the middle. He didn't rip it. He didn't throw it. That would have been anger. What he gave instead was something colder. Clarity. He placed the folded sheet back on the desk. Then he looked Richard Harlan directly in the eye and said 5 words. "My name stays. You go." The room went completely silent. Harlan blinked, almost laughing at first, because men like him assume power belongs to whoever owns the office. "I'm sorry," he said. Michael didn't move. "You heard me," he said, calm and exact. "My name stays. You go." Harlan's face changed, not from offense but from the first flash of fear, because in that moment he realized something he should have understood much earlier. He was not speaking to a desperate kid trying to get in. He was speaking to Michael Jackson. And Michael had just decided the meeting was over. Harlan tried to recover. "Let's not do something dramatic here." Michael's voice stayed low. "You asked me to leave my family outside the future," he said. "You asked me to cut my name loose so strangers would feel comfortable. You don't get to help build my career after saying that." He turned toward the door, then stopped and looked back once. "My mother gave me that name," he said, "and it's going to be on everything." Then he walked out. Catherine followed him. His brother followed after that. None of them looked back. Outside the office, in the hallway lined with gold records and framed covers, nobody spoke for several seconds. The family's attorney, who had been waiting down the corridor, stood up quickly when he saw their faces. "What happened?" he asked. Michael answered first. "He's done," he said, and he meant it. What Richard Harlan had not understood was that the industry looked stable from the inside, but reputations were held together by whispers. One meeting could travel faster than a press release if enough people repeated it in the right rooms. And this story traveled. Not because Michael ran to the press, he didn't. Not because Catherine complained publicly, she didn't. It traveled because assistants heard the tone, because someone in the hallway saw the Jacksons leave early, because the attorney made 2 calls, because one executive told another executive that Harlan had looked at one of the biggest artists in the world and asked him to become less himself. Within days, Harlan's version of the meeting started collapsing. At first, he framed it as a misunderstanding, then as a creative disagreement, then as an overreaction from a sensitive family. But every time he told the story, one fact remained impossible to clean up. He had suggested that Jackson was too black to sell. And in an industry built on black music while pretending to be uncomfortable with blackness, that kind of truth did not disappear quietly once it was spoken out loud. Artists started refusing meetings with him. A singer he'd been developing pulled out of a contract. A manager in New York told a trade writer, off the record, that Harlan had a race problem and bad instincts. A television booker who had once trusted him stopped returning calls. And the worst part for Harlan was this. Michael never had to attack him. He only had to keep succeeding with the same name. The next time Michael's name appeared on a record sleeve, on a tour poster, on a TV introduction, it carried more than fame. It carried defiance. It carried the memory of a room where someone had tried to make him smaller and failed. Months later, at an industry dinner, one of the label men, half drunk, trying to seem clever, joked within earshot of Michael, "Guess the old name worked out fine after all." Michael turned to him and smiled just enough to be dangerous. "It always was going to," he said. By the end of the next year, Richard Harlan had been quietly moved out of the position that once made him feel untouchable. No dramatic firing, no front-page scandal, just the slow, humiliating fade that happens when powerful people stop taking your calls. In the industry, everyone knew why. Officially, it was strategic restructuring. Unofficially, it was simpler. He had tried to erase the wrong family. Years later, when Michael was asked in an interview if he had ever been pressured to change who he was for success, he didn't tell the whole story. He didn't name Harlan. He didn't relive the room. He just said, "People will ask you to become easier to accept, but if acceptance costs your truth, it's too expensive." And for those who knew, that sentence carried an old office, an ugly offer, and 5 words that changed everything. "My name stays. You go." That was the moment the producer lost more than a client. He lost the illusion that he had the power to define what was marketable, acceptable, or worthy. Because Michael Jackson didn't just keep his name, he made it untouchable. If this story stayed with you, please like and subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that no dream is worth trading away who you are. Have you ever seen someone stand up for their identity when it would have been easier to stay quiet? Tell us in the comments and hit the notification bell for more untold documentary-style stories from the world of music.